Well, thank you all very much. My name is Buzz Brockway. I'm the Vice President for Public Policy here at the Georgia Center for Opportunity, and really excited to be talking here with Adam Gelb. He is the President and CEO of the Council for Criminal Justice, and he has, if you read through his bio, he has done just about everything. He's been a reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution covering crime, then worked for governors and senators and on committees and done, so he's kind of seen this whole issue from many different angles. Before he started the Council for Criminal Justice, he was with the Pew Center, which does a lot of research on all sorts of issues, but especially on crime as well. And he's here with us today to talk a little bit more about the policy aspect of things. I know we have some lawmakers here, we have some lobbyists here, and of course we have all sorts of folks who care very deeply about this issue. So, Adam, first of all, tell us a little bit about the Council for Criminal Justice and what you folks work on.
Thanks, Buzz. It is really just, can I say first, it is just terrific to be here with you and to be part of an event, an organization that is doing in many ways what we set out to do at the Council on Criminal Justice, which is to bring people from diverse backgrounds and experiences and expertise together and to hash through these issues and to do it in a serious and thoughtful way and not just preach to the choir as a matter of fact, but to bring people in who are going to wrestle honestly and seriously with these issues and really try to figure them out, because it's urgent and it's important that we do. It's not enough just to echo talking points. And that's fundamentally what we're doing at the Council on Criminal Justice. We're about 2.5 years old now. We're a national organization. We got two parts to the organization. We are a nonpartisan think tank, and we're an invitational membership organization. The think tank, we're doing research and a whole bunch of work designed to channel the national conversation about criminal justice reform increasingly in the direction of what actually works, not just what sounds good, but what we know from research and we know from lived experience actually works to improve people's lives. And that means both making their communities safer and reducing the long overreach of the correction system. And on the invitational membership side, what we're trying to do is lift up the criminal justice field. That's certainly been elevated in the last few years with what's going on nationally, but for a long time, I think still is a field that is thought of as secondary to the economy and economics and to foreign policy and health and these other issues, and to say that there are really amazing people doing amazing and important work in this field. They ought to be recognized for that and be part of a national organization. And I would say your panel first here was a perfect example of the kind of people and the level of discussion that's going on. When you put those two things together, for us, the think tank with the invitational membership organization, you get a powerful combination of being able to say that we're bringing together groups of people from across the political spectrum, from across the sectors of the field. We're asking them to focus on particular problems, like we've done with violence, like we've done with policing, like we did with COVID and criminal justice, and say what does a diverse group of leaders in the field think are the key findings and the key recommendations for where policy ought to go in these areas.
I think tying right into that, you have produced a number of reports, or excuse me, you have a couple of working groups. One of them is a working group addressing how to combat violent crime. So tell us a little bit about that and what the goals are and what you've found thus far.
Right. So the Violent Crime Working Group is the fourth cross section of diverse stakeholders that we've put together. We've got about 4 law enforcement officers, about 4 people who run community programs, including community violence interruption programs. We've got about 4 academics and some others. And we ask them to do something very simple and straightforward in terms of the question, but incredibly difficult with the answer, which is what the heck should be done right now about reducing the historic increase in homicide that's occurring here in Atlanta and across the country. And so they're about 5 meetings in. They're meeting every other week. It's incredible to hear their conversations and the level of honesty from law enforcement and from folks on the community side about the challenges. and invite folks to go into detail, but say, at least in terms of their work so far, the key piece has been to try to get away from simplistic diagnoses of the problem. You have a lot of people who want to say, oh, it's the increase in gun sales, or it's this, or it's that, it's the police withdrawing from the community, or it's the community withdrawing from the police. It's one or the other. I think our assessment, the assessment of this group, is very clear that it is a really toxic brew of all these different factors. The second piece is that as they start to plow through different potential solutions, is that cities need to do a really in-depth problem assessment first. You cannot just throw spaghetti against the wall here. We know that violence is concentrated among a very small group of people, and often at a very small number of places. And you got to analyze who those people are, and what those relationships are, and who those places are. There's a lot of conversation in Atlanta now about crime happening in different parts of the city. That's maybe true to a certain extent, but the violence is still concentrated, and the victims are still largely poor, black and brown people, and they deserve a robust response from the city.
So tying into that, the FBI just recently released their annual data on crime, and I think it points to what you were talking about. There's this perception out there that crime is rising all over the place. But when you dig into that report in a big city like Atlanta, and this is true in many other places across the country, overall crime continues to go down. Well, maybe not overall, but crime, for many, many crimes, it continues to decrease. This is something that we have seen in America for many, many years now, that crime is decreasing. And it's really just extremely violent crimes like homicide and aggravated assault that are rising. Pretty much every other crime is continuing to decrease. So I think, to your point, I'd love your thoughts on that, and to the point you were just saying, as policymakers, as advocates for criminal justice reform are thinking about these issues, it's important not to go overboard and not to make broad sweeping assessments. It's really just a couple of crimes that we're talking about. Now, obviously, those are heinous crimes, and loss of life is tragic, etc. But that compels us to a certain type of response, right?
Yeah, it certainly does. And yet, Buzz, I got to say, I feel like one of the worst things that we can do as part of as a community of people who are thoughtful and serious about this issue is to try to minimize or downplay what is happening with homicide and with serious violent crimes, and sort of sweep it away under a notion that well, if you count burglaries and larcenies and other offenses, that crime overall is down. I understand it. I've been around this field, as you said, for a long time. I understand the fear that people have that once people get scared about crime, they are going to reach for much more punitive solutions. I'd worry a lot about people saying those kind of things and losing credibility with people, as you're familiar with, in legislatures and otherwise, who are hearing day in and day out from people in their communities about what is happening. And the more dissonance there is between some notion that, well, crime is down, but my neighborhood is being overrun with violence, I think in the end we end up in a worse place.
I want to pivot a little bit to what can we do. Your organization produced a report. We all remember in the late 80s and early 90s there really was crime rampant across the country, and lawmakers responded in certain ways. And your organization produced a report about that effort, about that crime bill. Since then, of course, Georgia and many other states have taken steps to have a different approach to how we deal with crime. We heard some of that in our previous panel, and Georgia Center for Opportunity has been involved in many of those efforts to have a smarter approach to deal with this. So tell us a little bit about your report, and then I guess let's talk about what does that say to us about how we need to be looking at these issues now.
I really appreciate you bringing it up. The 1994 crime bill that you're referring to is, it's over a quarter century old now, and it has become, for a lot of people, sort of a microcosm of everything that went wrong in this country with respect to criminal justice policy, because it put more cops on the street, and it locked people up for longer terms, and it absolutely did that. The notion, though, that the crime bill was the spark that lit that fire is just off base, and that was really the theme of some of the pieces that we put out. Georgia, among them, states, and many states, were well down this path before the crime bill happened. You know, it takes a lot of time for Washington to get stuff done, even back then. So by 1994, when the crime bill passed, you had already seen a tremendous growth in the prison population in this country. And in fact, after the crime bill passed, the rate of prison growth in our country actually dropped. It was dropped in half, because there'd been so much building on the front end of it. So that was one of our chief findings, and I think the takeaway that we need to have for today, that we emphasize in the report, is that we need to be pretty humble about what Washington can do and how much we look to Washington for solutions on this problem, and probably on problems in general, but particularly on with respect to criminal justice, which is such a heavily state and local issue. Number one. And then secondly, to just really try to avoid being sucked into narratives and to looking for scapegoats on these things. I think that's really a key takeaway. You know, whether you want to say on balance the crime bill, looking back a quarter century, was a good thing or a bad thing, on balance. One thing that we can't do is ignore the fact and forget that it's really people who are in state legislatures like you were, Buzz, and others who are making these decisions far more than anybody in Washington.
Yeah, I think, and that's something that we really try to stress at GCO, is that just what you said, you know, what can we do locally? What can we do? There are programs that we have, and there are partnerships that we make, and many of the folks in this room are among those partnerships. What can we do on the local level before we, you know, what can we do through the private sector? What can people do? We try to do that first before we go to a state or local government, and then what can we do at the state level before we try to go to the federal government? So I agree with you. This really needs to be focal, because every part of the country is different, and every community in Georgia is different, and so a national response is going to you know, try to do everything you know, all the same way and ignore those differences, and even a response at the state level could ignore differences across the state of Georgia that might demand different solutions. So I guess, you know, kind of staying on this theme, Georgia's done some things in recent years, as you well know. We have things like accountability courts. We have, just this past session, a friend was reminding me, just this past session, we made a change to, my mind just went blank. That's what happens when you're sitting up here on the light. But probation, we made changes in probation that would allow people to go back to the courts and say, okay, I've served my time, I've stayed out of trouble, and now let me wipe away the rest of my probation, and make it easier to get a job, and those sorts of things. So we've done those things, but what are some other things that you think that Georgia might take a look at to continue down this path to a better outcome for everybody?
I'm gonna stay with the exact piece that you picked out. I think the most important thing that the state can do right now is to actually implement that particular provision and do it well. We have a criminal justice system that throughout its entire existence has been focused on one thing, and that is catching people when they screw up and locking them up. We catch them when they're doing wrong, and we lock them up. We need to shift that dynamic to catching people when they're doing something right, and reward them for positive behavior and progress, and not just sit around and ready to trail them, nail them, and jail them, as we say. And it's, you said there's sort of a lot of variance. Of course, there's variance on these things that need to be customized across the country, but I would think, as somebody who's worked in almost every state in this country in some shape or form, that one commonality here is the need to reward progress instead of just punishing failure. And that one provision is very simple. I think it passed with a significant bipartisan, with bipartisan support, and yet it is a microcosm of the most important single change that needs to happen, and that's a change in the attitudes of people in the system who work in the system. It's our goal to help people succeed, not just to wait and lock them up when they fail.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I mean, I think we've unfortunately run out of time. There's a tremendous amount of things we can talk about, but I guess tell us where folks can find more about your organization, and if they want to get involved with you on some of the the working groups that you have. I know you have another working group on policing, and I think that's an incredibly important issue as we talk about just what you were saying about how do we catch people when they're doing the right thing instead of just waiting until they do the wrong thing. Policing, of course, can play a key role in that. So tell us how folks can find you and how they can get involved.
It feels a little dated right now to say go to our website. Isn't there something like more exciting that you can say than that? But
TikTok or something? You do TikTok videos?
Go to our MySpace page. But it's counciloncj.org, counciloncj.org, and if you scroll through all the fabulous reports and consensus-based recommendations about policing and about violence, down to the bottom of the page you can sign up for our newsletter. We're on Twitter at counciloncj.
Awesome. Well, Adam Gelb, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming to talk with us today.